Section 29 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Wisdom of Mrs. Trevanna, Part 1. For 30 years I have lived out of the world. I mean the great world that keeps itself on the go and has fashions and movements and things that everybody is doing and faces that everybody is making. I am a gamekeeper in Africa. Not in the part where such a crowd of the best people from England are squatting, to get away from the Reds and the Rads. I work more inland, nearer the equator. It's very rural thereabouts, and the tsetse fly is king of the place. But England has now been given the job of swatting him, if she can, and running the show in his stead. And I am in England's pay. Some day we shall fall on that fly, as soon as we know what he most hates to be hit with. Meantime, I run down the fellows who kill too many elephants. It's quite a good life for a hale man of 50 like me. All out of doors, walking all day through the wilds with your file of black porters, sleeping under the stars with a lion, perhaps, coughing confidentially in the jungle. Any boy would jump at it. And yet it is work, in a way. You have to be wary with good old Nature. She bites. Miss your way to a well, and you and your string of black boys may be dried meat surprisingly soon. Besides, little famines blow all about Central Africa like the squalls on a sea. If you butt into one, you'll be for it. So mind your intelligence work. Then there's tact to be shown. Use a word in some playful, fanciful way, and some sizable king may think that you're just the rude sort of beast that would put the evil eye on his cattle. Then you're booked, too. And all the time you mustn't let down the good name of the whites. Of course, our good name is a bit of a bluff, you may say. We're not the demigods the natives want to think us, not by a long chalk. Still, a lot hangs on our not being swine in their sight. And it isn't always so easy. There's plenty of prime stuff to steal all over the place, and in some parts a chief who is putting you up for the night will offer you, last thing, the run of his wives. You see the sort of life, all a muck of cause and effect, and all deuced simple and quick in the workings. Play the fool and you're starved. Talk through your hat and you're knived. Do yourself well, beyond reason, and somebody else is done in, if not you. It's like Judgment Day in full blast on the premises. I fear it gets you into a cramped way of talking. Every word used with a literal, obvious meaning. No playful crying up of a thing unless you're game to go through with it. This may make you rather unfit for good talk among brilliant people. So much of their game is a starting of hares that they can't be bothered to hunt. So each time I come home, on leave, I fight more and more shy of the wits and good talkers. I can't keep it up on their lines. I bore them, and they dazzle me, and I have to ask too many questions that they think ironic or somehow offensive, although I only just want to know. So I go back more and more to the Alps when I am on leave. The good old peaks and passes don't do the brilliant nor put on fine manners. Give me mine ancient ice axe, a pocketful of food, and a few rocks or a glacier to play with, and I shall be all right for the day. Part 2. That was how I came to be walking alone, one hot afternoon this last August, up the rough track from the village and valley of Saas to the wee Weissmies Inn, on the snow line above. It's a 4-hour walk, and the rise is some 4,000 feet. The slope faces west, and my rucksack was full. So I fried happily in my fat as I walked and thought how good it would all look about 6 o'clock, when I ought to be at the inn. The sun just dipping behind the Mishabel's high snows, the cool Saas Valley darkening below, the glacier streams falling silent with frost, and the air getting crackly with crispness. And then hot food and mulled red wine, and perhaps 2 or 3 decent strangers at table, men of the kind you do meet at such places, plain fellows that laugh at small jokes, and will talk about routes and shortcuts by the hour. I can get on with such men. Halfway up, I was roused from these pleasant thoughts by the sight of some little flag of a thing about half a mile further on. I made out with the glass a young woman's light skirt. At her side was a man in +4s. They were not going strong. I don't care to hustle past people. Still, you couldn't walk more slowly than that pair. When I drew level, each of them had taken a seat on a baking-hot boulder. They seemed to be working each other up to despair of ever reaching the inn. The man was damning this bad eminence. I think he meant the whole eastern wall of the valley. The girl was widening still further the scope of this malison. "All mountains," she shouted, "are bloody." She seemed to shout whatever she said, as it were in disdain of anything so pusillanimous as reticence. Both were of the long, straight, loosely jointed English make, the well-to-do one. Both had a rather standardized sort of good looks. While the girl cursed the day she was born, she re-whitened, with a few broad flowing touches of a powder puff, the sepulchre of a deceased complexion. The man and I exchanged the straight-flung words and few that are prescribed by British custom in such places. At the end of this rite he asked, "Is there any serious ground, sir, for believing that an inn was ever hoisted up this foul gradient?" As a dull man, I could only tell him that I had slept there last week and could now see the building. I felt that it was a witless and bald thing to say. Still, you can get water to rise higher than its source. They certainly looked as if I had committed a pretty bad gaffe, calling for tact on their part. "Well," the man forbearingly said, "as the House of Loretto sailed across seas, I suppose a pub may go up a ladder." The girl had taken my offered Zeiss glass and was looking through it uphill. Espying the inn, she shouted, "Built, I perceive, in the street lavatory style of architecture." She still kept the glass to her eyes. "The beastly thing," she hallooed, "seems to be real. Clothesline and washing and all. Realistic, in fact. The landlady's undies are out in great force." She dropped the glass and glared at the man and me as if these words ought to have told on us somehow or other. The man, at any rate, exhibited no reaction to the stimulus. "Real?" he grunted wearily. "Of course it is. That's just the vice of this damn perpendicular Sahara. The mountains really go up. The sun is real hot. My feet are real sore. Jill, I tell thee flat, I'm out of love with all these overdone realities. What I want is more unsubstantial reverie." "Well, you are a filthy disheartener, Jack," bellowed Jill. They smoked cheerlessly for some moments. Then the girl shouted to Jack, "Say, you! Are we to leave our old bones here or a bit further on?" Jack scarcely looked at her. "Leave your prables, woman," he said. Then he turned to me. "You, sir," he said, with suavity, "are a strong and determined man. Should you win to yonder height and find there a Mrs. Trevanna—" "Trevanna!" I feared I must have bellowed like a girl of the period, for I, too, have my Mrs. Trevanna. "A lady," he said, "lightly stricken in years. Tell her from her daughter and the least deserving of her friends to bid the management not to wait dinner for us unless this can be done without injury to the food. One other word. Tell her, if we should not turn up at all, that we died as we had lived, each true to his or herself and no other. Say, 'Chuck it, Jack, before you make me vomit,'" yelled the fair Jill. For myself, I felt that a little of Jack's persiflage would go quite a long way towards supplying my needs. Besides, I was doing no good where I was. The distinguished cross-chat of this couple would go all the better without me. So I waited no more than to give them the basic facts, that the inn dined at 7, that all its staff were always snoring by 9, and that it was still a good 2-hour walk to the door. Then I stumped on up the track. Part 3. The shadows were fantastically long when I topped the last sharp rise to the inn and stood to take breath at that door. The sun was just dipping, according to program, behind the white peak of the Balfrin, throwing out wild and rather sensational shafts of horizontal light. Romance, you know. Beauty mixed with strangeness. Joylessly eyeing this pomp from 4 iron chairs on the inn's tiny terrace were 2 men and 2 women. 1 man and 1 woman were quite young. The 2 others must have been 40 or so. All were legibly stamped upper-middle-class English, the brainy variety, not the purely gold-digging sort, nor yet the horsey. I caught the characteristic intonation of Oxford, familiar in my youth. This exquisite falsetto was still echoing pleasantly down the corridors of memory when there was granted to me a yet more agreeable resurrection of the past. Out of the inn-door stepped, serenely genial as ever, only sunnily mellowed as with a fine autumn, the authentic Mrs. Trevanna, mine and my friends, not seen for nearly 30 years. As the young, ardent, and beautiful wife of one of our dons at Skimmery, Mrs. Trevanna had elder-sistered us all when I was at that famous college. Unpriggishly, unprudishly, merciful to our absurd conceits and inflations, a tender solvent of shy petrifactions, a banisher of boyish glooms, a diviner and disengager of any high impulse concealed by the vapors of hobbledehoydom, Mrs. Trevanna had made us all talk, get it out, clear our breasts of the perilous stuff, while she listened with genius, the kindest of comrades, confessors and confidants. There must be middle-aged men all over the world who remember Mrs. Trevanna as the friend who helped them more than any other to get the full use of their own latent powers. There's eloquence for you. But really, when one thinks of what that woman did for us, well, I suppose I mustn't begin all over again. Her face had ripened rather than changed. Genial lines that used to come to it for a second or two, an occasional means of expression, had etched themselves lastingly now. Her friendly life was printed upon her in those letters. Afterwards I half thought her voice was almost too perfect in its habitual use of certain tones of warming frankness. Some of the kind heart's sudden improvisations, as they had seemed long ago, came almost wearily now. Can a divine benignness become too much of a custom? But I am a beast to say this. True to the habits of the race, I betrayed the least that I could of my surprise and joy. Then I gave her my news of the 2 dawdlers soon to be involved in night. "Ah," she said lightly, "my Jill and Jack Poinder." She turned to pass on the news to the 4 intellectuals on the terrace. "Ho, ho," the younger man laughed. "Jill cast away, and who said it was feeble to ride up the side of a mountain? Jill, who asked should she order tea for us here? None other than Jill. Pride, thy very name is Jill, and thy second name Jack." That man made a flute of his voice, a rather high-pitched one. He played on it, and he was very blond and extremely pretty rather than handsome. You know how long some men will keep the looks of pretty boys. "What shall we write on their gravestone?" he fluted. "We spurned God's gift of mules, and here we are," was lazily suggested by the youngest woman. She was dark, and must have been at least half Jewish. She had curly lips, curly contours of cheek, curly hair, a whole system of seductive curliness. The effect was enhanced by good work with the paint-box. "Why a gravestone at all?" the 3rd woman said in a rather mincing and precisely chiseled voice. She was the 40-year-old. She was lean and precise, with black hair and black, beady eyes that twinkled frostily when she spoke. "Are there no alpine robins to cover lost babes with leaves?" "There spoke the wicked aunt," the elder man cooed, and I guessed from this that the beady-eyed one was a younger sister of Mrs. Trevanna's. There was indeed a faint likeness between them, but Mrs. Trevanna had all the milk and the marrow, the ruth and humaneness. All this was wit, I assumed, Wit, or what does in its stead in places where some sort of vivacity, some little shake of the rattle or other, is de rigueur. Either way, I confess I was bored. It's only the natural sparkle I like in a wine. Besides, there was plenty to look at just then, without listening to sallies. Mrs. Trevanna, for one thing, and also the going to bed of that sun. I can't describe such glories. Won't try either. Gush about sunsets and dawn is so rife that I guess wise people look the other way when they see a bit coming. The thing itself, though, bowled me over, knocked me dumb while it kept reeling off its film of miracles that melted into one another. End of section 29. Section 30 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Wisdom of Mrs. Trevanna, Part 4. When I could pay some attention again, I made out by degrees that I had butted in with my news in the midst of a grand palaver about frankness of speech, as these people called it. They had gone back to it now, hammer and tongs, with Mrs. Trevanna to act as a kind of informal moderator of the assembly. She did it mighty well, and I can't deny that, to my old-fashioned thinking, some moderating was wanted. Miss Laura Sturt, the beady-eyed, was running, for all it was worth, if not more, the good old proposition that free speech should stick at nothing whatever. All reticence, she explained, was mere morbidity. No one who wasn't a primitive savage ought to taboo any topic. Thoughts went bad if they were kept in dark holes in one's mind. Her voice grew sharper and sharper to match, as I took it, her growing sense of having got hold of the right end of the stick. We haven't the right, she laid down, to shut out any side of it. Call nothing unclean or common, eh? Mrs. Trevanna pensively murmured. I fear the friend of candor did not quite like this imputation of being in agreement with Scripture. That God hath made, she said rather loftily, is that anything more than the old lèse-majesté business? Well, well, she conceded indulgently, the Holy Ghost is welcome to his own sense of relative values, but what we've got to do is to stick fast to ours. This above all, to thine own self be true, the elder of the two men quoted, in a sort of demure purr. He had a merry eye, that fellow. It struck me that this must be his little joke, to tease the advanced Miss Sturt by quoting old tags out of the Bible and Shakespeare, by way of hinting that she was not half so modern as she supposed. She parried and lunged. "Is that Shakespeare?" she asked. "Please instruct me. I feel I'm not so well versed as you are in the primitives." This riposte had more effect than you might have expected from such simple fencing. All but Mrs. Trevanna rushed to wash their hands of any complicity in the old Shakespeare cult. With anxious speed they settled the hash of the poor swan of Avon. Why, he was as vieux jeu as Tennyson, Thackeray, Arnold. Whichever of them, Mrs. Trevanna murmured benignly, was the goosiest goose on the green, and we poor Victorian villagers used to think that they too were swans. That set them off on the Victorians, mowing down the poor things. The idols of my youth were soon lying in long swaths. Austin Hood, the boyish blonde, slew them by dozens, and then Audrey Myers, the curvilinear Jewess, slew them by 20s. But it was she who gave the next turn to the debates of this Senate. When a spring tide of advancement has flowed up and up till it can flow up no more, the only advanced thing that is left for it to do is to ebb. I think that must have been Audrey's notion. When most of the tall figures embalmed in the Dictionary of National Biography had been heartily mauled, it was Audrey who first opened out on the clemency tack. "I must admit," she said, with a cool, complacent sort of slowness, "the old bard had a staggering trick, now and then, of reaching out about 3 centuries forward and catching almost the note of the best work of today. You should read, if you haven't, The little back chat that Helena has with Parolles. In All's Well, you know. Diana Myrtle might have written it. In her Ripe Medlars, you know. The book the stupids sent her down from Girton for. I didn't take to that girl, Audrey Myers. There was a smear of lazy, tepid sensuality about her much curved lips and dimples. Salome might have looked like her, not when strung up to dance, but when basking on a flat roof in the sun, blinking down at the young men going by in the street like some sleek Baudelarian cat. A creature exotic, chimeric, alluring, a sphinx with some secret not fit to be printed. I didn't take to her the more for having once read the stuff she referred to, real stinking stuff with no quality but a stink, the kind of tap that the divinest genius ever born would turn on when he was dead out of form but remembered how well dirt will sell any day. You know those croppers of old Shakespeare's? In my job one soon loses patience with that sort of playing with fire. That cause and effect are related is only too damnably clear, and the fire's a lot too hot to be played with. Still, one can't go on testifying, so I held my peace and stared at the small rim of sun that was left, still throwing out a few fierce horizontal rays. Miss Sturt, it appeared, was incommoded by this celestial pageant. "I really can't stand," she said, rubbing her eyes, "this somewhat garish effulgence." She rose and went into the inn. Informally, the session stood adjourned. In a minute or two there was nobody left on the terrace but Mrs. Trevanna and I. She took a good look at the crimson glow that was now dying down in the west. "Do we all seem," she said, "very insensitive people?" "You? No," I said. Hadn't she taught me perception when I was a young lout rather proud of his own callowness? "Your friends don't worship setting suns, though, do they?" "Does anyone?" she asked, "in his own youth? Unless, of course, one is very uncommon." Part 5. I put that in my pipe and smoked it a while. I had time, having no change of clothes to get into. Well, these young things, I thought, seemed to have a funny outfit of new gods. Could the gods that we had sworn by 30 years ago have ever seemed as funny to people 30 years older than I, with their fond recollections of mighty movements by which they too had been carried away in their youth? Your youth has a way of returning upon you under some visual image or symbol, a scene, a typical moment of life as it used to be then, only quickened, intensified, doubly charged with meaning and with at least a semblance of beauty. Such visions may drift in at any odd moment. One visited me then. A sense of all the height and heat of such enthusiasm as had animated me when I was 21 recurred to me suddenly as a picture of 4 or 5 men about my own age, sitting out after dinner in the Trevanna's garden at Oxford, and talking the June sun out of the sky. Eager, immature talk, much of it the joyous whoopings of young discoverers of delights that seemed wonderful then, though perhaps they were not quite new to the world. Delight in Rossetti's haze of luxurious reverie, and in the cool pearly dews on Tennyson's bird-haunted lawns, and then the tonic thrill of standing, with all your wits braced and alive, under the stinging shower bath of sparkling spray from Meredith's astringent wit. But when dusk had released mind and tongue from the last bonds of shyness, then it came out that what everyone there had hugged closest to heart all the time was a secret joy in old Browning's adjurations to men and women not to have a scrubby life of it, nor a mawkish one, nor a dirty. By some miracle we had for once been made unashamed of a private wish to live stoutly, and that dropping of masks had united us all, for the hour, in a kind of sacrament of confession, of mutual trust in each other, not to misread or to sneer. All of it came back to me so movingly now that I could see the solemn skyline of the carved yew hedge in the Trevanna's garden, and 2 bats twirling about in the twilight, and Mrs. Trevanna sitting with the beauty of her face in dark shadow, though I could swear she was glad, for it was her work. She brought such moments to pass, disengaged the clogged spirit, and called the waters from the rock. End of section 30. Section 31 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Wisdom of Mrs. Trevanna, Part 6. At dinner that night, I must have been in the way. They made such a point of insisting that I wasn't. Still, they got through a fine lot of talk. I'm oldish now, but most of them were, in a way, much older than I. They had got past so many things, or seen through them, and they clearly had no use at all for most of the things that had always seemed biggest to me. They seemed to compete with one another in offering proofs that they never wondered at anything now, and never admired. First it was public affairs, as they're called. One Sir Ludovic Sturt, a brother of Mrs. Trevanna's, had just taken a fall in a by-election at home, and his other sister disclaimed, almost anxiously, any surprise or distress at this misadventure. "Why should anyone vote for Conservative now?" she asked. "If we did ever get the past back, we'd be sick on the spot. I know Ludovic would. He'd simply loathe spacious days. As for rough island stories, he would as soon have horsehair and mahogany come back to life." "You miss the point, O most Roman of sisters," the elder man said. "The choice wasn't between Ludovic and the future. It was between Ludovic and a radical." "Small choice in rotten apples," Laura retorted with spirit. "Stick in the mud wearing blue, or stick in the mud wearing yellow. Who cares whether the patter is patter about church and empire, or patter about social ills and broad outlooks? The patter habit itself is what wants abolishing. Well, Austin, don't look so shocked." I was finding that each of them had a way of assuming that his or her last little bomb must have startled all hearers. But Austin Hood was not shocked. None of them was, ever. Not to be shocked was, I made out, a sacred convention. Hood only wanted to slip in his own bit of phrasing. "Let's flog my dead horse," says Mr. Liberal. "No, let's all flog mine," says Mr. Tory. "Isn't that," drawled the young idle woman out of the East, "why everybody's going Labour now? Labour is advanced, anyhow. Silly, perhaps, but not bogged up to the axle in pre-war stupidities like the others." "Of course," said Miss Sturt. "Who wants a cow that's still chewing the grass she was grazing before the war came and showed everything up?" "That's where the Bolsheviks score," said Miss Myers. "They do at least try to get some sort of move on. So do the fascists. Both are advanced in a way. No doubt they're a little wild-catty. Still, they do live in their own day, and not Garibaldi's or Peter the Great's." There I had the temerity to butt in. From all that I've seen while doing a bit of killing myself, in war and police work, I have contracted a notion that killing is cried up too much, as a means of getting things done as you want them. Somehow it doesn't deliver the goods as the fat men expect when they stand in front of good fires and say, "You've only got to shove 'em up against a wall and shoot 'em, all the measly lot." It's apt to get back on you, too, in all sorts of queer ways. Mind, I don't say that all these kill-'em-quick fascists and Bolshevists aren't nice, well-meaning men, but they're too sentimental for me. Too much gush about the moral beauty of doing in Tom, Dick, and Harry at sight for not coming up to the mark in some way or other. Not practical to my thinking. Not business. I hoped I wouldn't be going too far in avowing this whim. I tried to put it humbly, but that didn't save me. It was as if I had brawled in a church, knocked a bit off the altar. The pretty blond man piped up in protest, till he was almost as shrill as a boy in a choir. "Don't you think," he squeaked at me austerely, "we're prone to make far too much of a fetish of deferring in the case of other people, the perfectly common experience of dying? I should have thought, please tell me if I'm wrong, that the noblest ages were those in which no man could feel sure, when he went out in the morning, that he would come home alive. And if for ourselves we seek the life perilous, why not for others? But of course I don't know." In uttering the last 3 words, his voice soared up into a positive treble of conscious rightness and unanswerableness. I fear I have an unsociable habit of checking people's noble speeches by reference to my own narrow and unheroic experience. I practiced this slavish trick now, and for the life of me, I couldn't see that I did want my life to be more perilous. Lions, pythons, puff-adders, malaria, blackwater fever, these little bunkers seemed to me to suffice for the modest needs of my spiritual nature, without any revival of the old propensity of the gallant Masai to knife you while you sleep. And of course, the little risks of a life like mine are only more obvious and elementary, not greater, than those of living in Mayfair or Hampstead. But what's the use of incurring the scorn of people who have more spirit than oneself? So I lay low for the moment, and that means, in such cases, forever. In this ignoble evasion I was assisted by a new turn in the talk. The moment the nice fair youth knocked on the head my luckless fetish of unbloodthirstiness, the others seemed to scent the blood of idols in general, and rushed forth to massacre, pell-mell, the false gods of the late 19th century. I always except Mrs. Trevanna. She merely brooded benevolently over this hurly-burly, ready to help out anyone who was stuck for a word, or was not getting an equitable share in the bloodshed, though all looked after themselves pretty well. In a general way, her attitude was that of the master artist, who just goes round from pupil to pupil in his studio, saying only, "Continue, my children," and letting the quiet sunshine of his countenance fall upon their easels. The rest got to work on the pogrom as keenly as if all would be lost, if a single golden calf were left on its feet by the time our simple meal of goat and marmot was ended. To people more fully abreast of the times, this slaughter might appear to be a mere re-slaying of the slain. When the elder man, Lycett, led off by downing the slave virtues of hard work and turning up for it in time, I myself fancied that I had once read some gifted person's scathing exposure of these malpractices. But I live so much out of the world that, I must confess, I was stung by the indictment now. It made my face tingle to think what a point I had made, in all my long jungle treks, of coming on parade right up to time every morning and never taking a lift in a litter while my men walked. Base, it appeared, was the slave who did any such things. I must have looked a little disconcerted at finding how far the march of mind had passed me by, for Mrs. Trevanna gave me first aid in a good-humored whisper. "You mustn't mind Peter Lycett. Unpunctuality is his métier. It's in the family. One of his dear father's people came up just too late to sign the Magna Carta." Mrs. Trevanna then took a very small hand of her own in the game, but the fetish she led to the block was only one which many old-fashioned persons like me have often thought quite fit to die. It was the mawkish cult of useless self-sacrifice, self-immolation for nothing or for not enough, the fault of the women of talent who throw up some great piece of work to keep house for rich, peevish parents who don't really need them. Mrs. Trevanna did not make the indictment wider than that. I fancy she shared a sneaking suspicion of mine that in most other acts of self-sacrifice there's something not quite definable on the good side. Some elusive item of value comes into being. A mystic addition is made to the excellence of the world. Its air is rendered finer. I own I'm corrupt in this matter. I have been bribed. I once bathed, like a fool, in a river that I didn't know, and one of my black boys spotted a crocodile making up to me with intent under the surface. That fellow took a short run and dived right into the crocodile's jaws before they could nip me. So I suppose I've been nobbled. I somehow can't quite see that black friend's action as a mere stupidity, or as veiled egoism or rank showing off, or any other of the despicable elements into which any and every such form of devotion was swiftly cut up by our friends. But they all took a firm seat on my head. They queried my facts. Was I quite sure, they asked, that the man knew a crocodile when he saw one? Was I sure that a crocodile really was there? Was I sure the man wasn't a cinema fan? And so on, until I felt as if we had all seen the little affair, except me. At any rate, what I said wasn't evidence. It seemed there was some consolation for that. I wasn't the only bad witness. After all, what is evidence? Purred the voluptuous Audrey mellifluously. Just the mutual reaction, I suppose, of a personal temperament, the most changeful thing in the world, and of something unstable outside it, something we recklessly christen the facts, as though they were fixed, whereas it's as likely as not that they have no existence, but such as our highly temperamental senses confer on them. What's truth, in fact? Mrs. Trevanna breathed softly, as poor Pilate asked. Or truthfulness either, cried Laura. With that she set about the old nursery fetish of telling the truth, though the sky fall, or even the ceiling, as she added smartly. Hadn't the Great War shown that that cock wouldn't fight? Had we not had to put all our truthfulness by in a drawer, with the redcoats and the bearskins, as soon as the real pinch came, and tell lies for all we were worth, in communiques, in the press, in our propaganda all over the world, lie as spies do in enemy country where nothing but lying will keep them alive for an hour? Audrey was quite of that mind. It seemed she had been at school during the war. She described rather vividly, in her sensuous drawl, the elation of all the more bright-witted girls like herself when that old incubus of veracity was discredited. We lied and lied and lied, she said with a sort of sleepy gusto. It felt like having a glorious new power. Some of the teachers got stuffy about it. I mean the old fossils. But all the younger ones understood. Mrs. Trevanna smiled. You must have been a thoroughly bad lot of girls, she said, with no sting in her tone. Bad? Good? Audrey derisively droned. Is anyone either? Some eggs seem to be, I said, vulgarly. The Oriental beauty half turned to me. Ah, you see the point, she said with ironic approval. Yes, we can be good and bad, only as eggs are. Poor things that didn't lay themselves, didn't addle themselves, didn't do anything but express their poor selves as well as they could. Who'd blame a bad egg? Send it to prison? Put it on 6 months' probation to see if it would be good and stop smelling? End of section 31. Section 32 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Wisdom of Mrs. Trevanna, Part 7. While I was digesting this piece of moral philosophy, weary voices and the squeal of heavily nailed mountain boots upon stone came into hearing outside, and a loud knock on the inn door brought the landlady and her one red-armed waitress rushing out to offer welcome. Within another minute, Jack and Jill tottered into the little dining room where we were now at the stage of coffee, cognac, and tobacco. In slavish obedience to an outworn convention, I rose to cede my chair to the exhausted Jill. Jack dropped into it promptly. The rest of our party stuck to their seats with true spontaneity. All except Mrs. Trevanna. That good-natured woman, I fancy, would not let me stand alone in an absurd solecism. so she gave up her own chair to Jill, who was most willing to have it. Thus was the fetish of politeness sent to its long home, without even such drumhead court-martial as had been accorded to each fellow fetish that had preceded it to the tumbril. On some impulse that seemed to be general, the belated arrivers were now made the theme of a spirited, impromptu burlesque of obsolete canons of propriety. The sport was to hint that, after this night excursion together, the two would have to be married in all haste to preserve the lady's good name. The hints grew broader and broader, each free spirit capping the gallant candor of the last with some new feat of self-liberation from fig leaves. When Mrs. Trevanna found some gentle means of suggesting the artistic value of a modicum of reserve, this polite comedy took a slightly different color, and great play was made with witty allusions to such calls as a long day on foot in the open may make on the delicacy, or, as Audrey would have it, the salutary frankness, of young man and maid. I can think of few sides of life, few physical ones, that these brave spirits shut out during the next 20 minutes. When the couple had stood this savory fusillade for that long, and given about as good as they got, Jill Trevanna broke new ground by shouting across to Miss Sturt, "By the way, I've lugged up your old beast of a book all the way. It weighed tons." The news seemed to burnish the little black beads in the lean lady's eyes. "What?" she exclaimed. "My dear Kitty Tressilian's superstition of chastity? You'll be rewarded in heaven for this." Lycett looked arch. "A somewhat question-begging title," he observed. Miss Sturt glared upon him. "Better read it for yourself," she said. "You'll soon find that Kitty is no question-beggar. I'd like to see the things she won't face." I felt no such desire, but then I'm a man and no more, and the void where the desire ought to have been was not filled by what we heard about the fearless Kitty's book during the next quarter of an hour. We heard much. Audrey and Laura seemed to know the volume by heart. So did Austin, the blonde. I gathered that it was quite the big noise for the time among hard-riding followers of the advanced movement. Laura said it was written in the true spirit of science, took the human subject right back to childhood, traced to the root, as she put it, the foul warp that many a young mind must take from the insensate efforts of parents to check its natural urge to put its fingers in the jam and its pure tongue in the pure treacle. As Laura warmed to the work, she went back further yet. She exposed the tangled web that is woven round a helpless infant by uninstructed mothers and nurses, when they subject its discharge of the simplest bodily functions to an arbitrary and archaic etiquette, inevitably shackling the seedless soul and clouding the dawn of personality. A bib, by itself, might wreck a whole life. Those steely beads were brightening all the time in Laura's pioneer eyes as she breathed like an angel of death on the faces of the various forms of self-control that we learnt in our youth. They were all bad mistakes, it appeared, and not innocent either. They were fetishes, and Miss Tressilian had found that they all took their rise from black conspiracies to bolster up some rotten institution or other, chiefly property and marriage. Property, it appeared, was bad enough. That much, Miss Stewart said, with a fine gesture of dismissal, was acknowledged by all serious thinkers. But marriage was the very devil. At any rate, monogamy was. That did surprise me at the moment, for I had always assumed, like an ignoramus, that the monogamization of such a loose fish as man had been one of the biggest scores notched by women in all time. But Miss Sturt knew better. Wasn't she herself on the executive of the MMG Guild, short for Marriage Must Go? Away with the old holy state, a phrase much quoted by Miss Sturt, and always in a tone so scathingly sarcastic that I felt I must have escaped a lot of infamous living when I remained a bachelor, although I didn't want to. Part 8. That was about the climax, I think. With what was left of their annihilatory fervor, they mopped up a few minor virtues, honesty, equity, loyalty, shame, and the like, that had escaped death during the first victorious advance, fetishes all. There was a lot to be said on both sides, they agreed, about cheating at cards. Mere honor was the merest scutcheon. In fact, as Miss Myers comprehensively said, in these so-called times, the whole morality stunt is getting somewhat excessively gaga. By now their voices were growing quite perceptibly sleepy, and I was to get up at 2 a.m. to walk by myself up the delectable slopes of crisp snow to the top of the Fletchhorn. So I slipped out of the abattoir to make for my bed, just when things were beginning to look pretty black for the fetish of courage. I found in the hall that Mrs. Trevanna had slipped out before me. She stood at the inn door, looking out at the moonlit magnificence of the heights. It was now perfectly still. The forces from which the world issued seemed to be resting. She beckoned me out to the door. "I hope you're not dreadfully bored," she said, "by this innocent little convention of having no innocence." "It's their having no youth," I grunted, "that makes me sorrier for 'em." "Of course," she said, "they aren't like the things they say. Who is? Were we, who said, 'We fail to rise, are baffled to fight better, sleep to wake'?" Again I saw that Oxford garden. "Oh, I suppose we were pretty tall prigs," I said ruefully. "No, we only followed a fashion. It was the way to talk then, to clap honor and duty and truth on the back, very hard. And now the way is to make them all stand on their heads. But it's all the same thing. It meets the same need." "You mean?" I said, puzzling. "It's good for them, somehow. Just making the noises. It helps, the way crying, in reason, is good for a baby. The way it helps some surgeon men to say, 'Bless us,' and others to keep saying, 'Damn,' and 'Oh, hell,' all the time while they operate." "Then these young destructives operate?" I inquired. "They are all working people," said Mrs. Trevanna. "Laura teaches at a school. Audrey only looks like Cleopatra. She's a rather efficient accountant. Jill researches in physics. Austin Hood is a hard-working tutor at Oxford. Jack Poindar, a good actor, slowly making his way. Peter Lycett, a rich man, who wears himself out on a prison gate mission." "I beg their pardon, and yours," I said. I was chewing a thought. Was it thus that Mrs. Trevanna had viewed the grand splutterings of my comrades and me in our youth? She had seemed to be with us so utterly. Had we been no more in her sight than a child whom any motherly woman must clap on the back to help him to cough up a crumb that has stuck? We and our visions of the hero faces thronging through the cloud rift? "Of course," she said softly, "one mustn't expect what they say to be very wise." So ho! Had it been even so when we were confessing our towering aspirations and splendid resolves? "There's this in it, too," said Mrs. Trevanna. "You know how, as soon as you've said a thing, rather, well, oversaid it, you know, as one does when one is tipsy with talking, a sort of reaction begins in your mind. A kind of an ebb tide sets in. You draw back from that dear, silly high-water mark. One daren't say so at the time. One so hates to be ever seen taking in sail. So one does it in acts, on the quiet. That way, one may really be helped to be wise by the rubbish one talks. And just now I think it's best, on the whole, for young people to get that sort of little rebound towards the simple old sanities. Truth and hard work and self-mastery. All the fixed stars. You understand, don't you?" I pondered. "There's one thing," I said, "that I don't understand. When all we young duffers were all gassing about doing good and the Rabbi Ben Ezra and fighting breast forward, and you listened kindly, what was it that we needed to be headed back from?" "Well," she said slowly and gently, "all you dear boys might have jumped up and rushed away into the slums in a body, just to go up and down doing good. And that's not a life for a man." I couldn't quite see her face. It was in a dark shadow again, as it had been in the garden at Oxford on that distant evening. But again I felt I could guess it, this time as a witty Madonna's happy in having a sense of humor as well as her power to love, wise and tender to all her children, but not taken in by any of their little whoops and trumpetings, trumpet they this or trumpet they that, and whoop they never so bravely. It made me feel rather humble, and yet rather glad. So this was what it came to, the mighty swell of the heart in one's youth, the burst of dream and desire that seemed to have enough strength to break worlds. This was how it had looked all the time, to the sane and humorous eyes of the Mother Nature that lived in Mrs. Trevanna. Well, so be it. Our high horses can't live forever. And we must remember that things might be worse. What if the world contained little trumpeters only, and none of the Mrs. Trevannas, whose mercy endureth from generation to generation? "But here I am," she said, "keeping you up. Don't forget the Seshahaya stuff to put on your face in the morning. And now I must go and send them to bed." As I pulled off my boots in my attic, I heard the door of the dining room open again, and a spate of voluble voices break forth. They all talked at once, but I dimly made out that they were all agreeing that passion was everything, and authority nothing, and that the life force must be given its rights. Then I heard a gentle "Hush!" from Mrs. Trevanna, and the whole din ceased at once, and I could hear her saying mildly that no one must talk any more, as the house was asleep, and that they must all leave their windows wide open and not be afraid of the frost. There was no sound after that. End of section 32, and of The Wisdom of Mrs. Trevanna, by Charles Edward Montague. Section 33 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Didn't take care of himself. Part 1. I liked Jimmy Brinton at school. I don't swear I should have liked him quite as much if I had put my money on him every time he went in for one of the great prizes of this life. Head of the school, or a place in the 8 that rode for it at Henley. For Jimmy was like certain horses. He had more of the runner-up habit than of the winning one. Before the 8 went into training, our last year at school, Jimmy was held to be dead sure to stroke it. And yet, when Henley came, he was only 9th man. We ran on the towpath together alongside our crew in the final, and Jimmy was so taken up with roaring praises and encouragement at the man rowing stroke in his stead that he stumbled clean into the river at Fawley, much to the entertainment of the public. We left school together, vowing on no account to lose sight of each other, as people do vow at such times. I scarcely saw him for the next 5 years. From school he went to the bar, as fast as the rules and timetables allowed. This was not Jimmy's act, really. It was his father's. All that Jimmy did was to be nice to his father. The father, you see, was one of those practical men who always know better. Nothing like the bar, he said, for any fellow with brains, and nothing like starting as early as ever you can in the race of man's life. My own father, not being practical, differed. It isn't any good, he said, in any sort of race to try beating the pistol. So I went to Oxford to wait for the pistol. I vote for my father's plan every time. Most young men of spirit are mad in some ways, and a university makes a quite good padded room. By the time they go down, they will have learnt, if they have any luck, that you can't ram and sink a brick wall with your forehead. Besides, there's a kind of informal mop fair or hiring fair every summer at Oxford. Employers of labor drop in and look around, with the aid of wise dons, for any young man, at the end of his time, who has gumption or guts, or is fit to be left alone with a job. If they make such a find, they fling themselves upon him and bind him to them with gold chains. Even a relative dud may get a good situation if he looks sharply about him and bears it in mind that the fair is soon over. In 5 years from the time I left school, I had a job after my own heart at Leeds, such work as I should have done anyhow, just for the fun of it, if I had been a rich man, and yet I was well paid for doing it. By that time, Jimmy had been sitting for a good 2 years in his chambers in the Temple, his wig nice and clean in its box, his gown all ready on a peg, his best nisi prius look on, waiting for someone to knock at the door and walk in with brief number 1. Nothing like making a good early start? Oh, these practical men. Part 2. Mind, Jimmy himself told me nothing about these delays of the law. For all that he said, he might have been turning work away from the door every day, from sheer excess of it. For then he'd have said nothing either. I merely gathered the facts from the atmosphere. They soaked into me. It was on the first night of my first yearly holiday from my job. I was bound for the Alps, to climb there for a month, and was staying for 1 night in London before taking train for Elysium from Victoria. So I went, after dinner, to look Jimmy up in Vane Court, for I knew that he slept there as well as waited for the employment which came not. Do you by chance know Vane Court, Middle Temple? Among the comeliest group of old dwelling-places in London, it is beauty's crown of beauty, at any rate on a long evening laid in a glorious June, with the strong wine of your very conscious manhood's first holiday turning your head divinely. At Jimmy's high open window we sat out the twilight. A fountain plashed below in the court. Beyond there were roses and lawns in a long-shadowed garden. A winning vista of terrace and stairway, all done in white stone, drew the eye on to where barge after barge was sliding with an air of infinite leisure down the shining Thames. The dim skyline of Surrey Hills, pensive in mist, the sunken roar of the Strand singing bass to the Temple sparrow's wee treble, the evening peace of the old inn, with daylight and lamplight sociably bedecking one another. Is it only the life and joy in ourselves that make the passionate perfection of all these ravishing things? Or is there anything left of them after we go? I wondered. I sat, as it were, in a warm bath of poignant delight and luxurious sadness. And then somehow the fact about Jimmy soaked into me. Do these warm baths, like others, open some sort of delicate pores in a man? I had not known before that Jimmy had failed, but I did know it then. I saw him as he was now likely to be, behind the screen of his courtesy, a being, perhaps, like the forsaken princess of the story, dying in her tower all her life, of a starved heart and of missed self-completion, but always contained and not crying out. And then, somehow or other, I lost hold of that vision. My sympathy shallowed away. I saw my friend only as the untroubled figure which he chose to offer for public inspection. And so no doubt I grew wildly selfish again, and fanfaronaded and whooped about my own joys, as a young man will do while the luck holds. He soars, he is a hawk, he trots the air, like the Dauphin on that horse of his. Jimmy played up like an angel to my tempestuous satisfaction with life. He did not merely endure my ecstasies. He made them his own. He carried them on. He glowed and exulted with me. He took up my rhapsodies, made better things of them, and then gave me them back, as if all the improvement were mine. I only remember one wisp of our talk. I think I had quoted, as thousands of people must do every year when they feel chirpy, that purple patch out of the Bible about stars singing together and sons of God shouting for joy. He kindled at once. "What a talent," he said, "the Holy Ghost had. What a writer! Of course he was at it a pretty long time. I mean writing the whole of the Bible, and roped in all the great wits, don't the critics say now, of several ages to help him. Even so, what variety! Any jack thing you may feel, in any old mood, he'll say it for you unimaginably well. Mystic and skeptic and fairy tale teller, moralist, legalist, amorist, pacifist, diehard, all of them there. He takes turns in the parts. Don't you fancy we all come to read him in bed of a night, as we grow up, and find out for ourselves what's the best of light reading? He never can bore in the Mass. He has too many tones, semitones, overtones, every known means of tickling your mind into heeding him, everything that can take you out of yourself, as a barmaid said to me once in praise of the works of the great Miss Corelli, and taken in little doses, carefully chosen. Can't he just cocker you up if you're not going strong, or soothe you when you're mellow, or, oh, but what shall one say of his gift of mixed metaphor? Then, and whenever he let his tongue go, it seemed as if you had said all the bright things yourself. That's my mind, uttering itself at last, you felt, and you glowed with a kind of complacency at your light touch and your critical sense of your flitting vivacity. Only as I was going away did it strike me that every man, as Hamlet observed, hath business and desires, and that we two had been talking all night about mine, and not at all about Jimmy's. I lingered a little, smitten with shame and trying faintly to draw him on to his affairs. He dried up quietly at once, as if such a topic could interest nobody. So I said good-bye, and then he seemed a little compunctious, as if he had been too snubbing before. With a smile that was extraordinarily kind and humble, he gathered the triceps muscle of my arm into one of his big, sensitive hands, and slowly kneaded it in a friendly way that he had had with me at school. "Come again," he said, "en route to paradise, or back from it." And then, just as I looked back from a lower turn of the stairs and saw the big and square shoulders of Jimmy disappear through his door, there came to me one of those fugitive gleams of certitude which rest upon no evidence that you can specify at the time, and yet are so vividly real that you can only wonder whether truth has more means of presenting itself to our minds than we have yet been able to catalogue. Jimmy, I felt in that way, was going back into his chambers as into some sort of a hell. Not the red-hot fiery kind, with any amount of wicked good company on the grids, but some sort of cold, blank, and vacuous hell, such as solitary occupation of a burnt-out moon. While the gleam lasted, I vowed I would look Jimmy up on my way home from Switzerland, but gleams of that sort fade quickly. Once I had got at the Alps, I soon lost my head in the old delectable way, that of the lover alone with the beloved one at last. Home, work, friends, mere midges, all of them, for the time, spinning somewhere in the air outside. And then, at my holiday's end, the joy of work closed in on me again, like the clasping draw that sets in as soon as the heart has had enough of expanding. Gad, what health one had then, and health has a selfishness of its own, as the invalids have. Part 3. It was over a year before I descended again upon the capital, and spent a whole hot August afternoon in restless felicity, walking to and fro between the shops of the men who sell foreign money, the men who sell folding lanterns for climbers, the men who sell jam in quarter-pound tins, and the Festal Hotel near Victoria Station, the blessed birthplace of so many unforgettable holidays. But first I had made sure of Jimmy for dinner that evening. Looking back now, I can see he had changed in the year. Not that he looked really battered or dusty. It was not so marked as all that. He looked, well, not quite the special and radiant opposite that he had always seemed to those things, with the liquid shine of his full brown eyes, the mobile glow of his cheeks, and the natural luster of his very dark auburn hair, which curled in a vigorous way, like that of classical statues and a few very strong men. But I didn't see that at the time. I suppose I wasn't out to see any such things. I was much too well off. I fancy the whole visible universe had to be, for me at that moment, one smiling landscape, with no figures in it more sombre than swains happy in their loves and cows satisfied with the pasture. All rivulets had to babble gaily and wittily. Jimmy certainly fulfilled this last requirement like a master. He chimed in with my mood. He rejoiced with them that rejoice. Over our wine he plied me with an intoxicant much more delicious, a foretaste of the mountain joys that I was going to. "Feel it already?" he asked. "Dawn and the cool of a wind lipping over a pass, and the bite of the blown grains of ice on your cheek?" The feel of the things came to my face as he spoke of them. "Gad!" I exclaimed. "How you know?" "I?" he said, as if that had nothing to do with it. But he went on. "And the sun rising cold from behind a black ridge, so cold you can stare at it straight. You can count all its cold yellow spikes if you like." You see how he spoke, with the bare phrasing of people who love, a thing too much to talk slops about. And I was in rapture, of course. Who wouldn't be, at having good incense burnt on the shrines of his particular gods? I sniffed up the smell of it hard. Others than Jimmy might have been decent enough about a friend's hobby, but you would have felt that they were indulgent, elder brotherly, somehow superior. Jimmy talked as if he himself had never had any hobby but this. His color rose and his eyes shone larger as he spoke about the illusion a huge dome of snow can give you, a sense of being cocked up on the actual spherical swell of the earth's globe, and of the other illusion you get there at night, the feeling of the mighty swish of the earth as it goes whirling through space. To hear him was rousing to me, beyond words, and yet it never felt as if Jimmy were saying anything very vivid or ingenious. It was only as if my own recollections were growing wonderfully fine, as if it were I who could talk with the tongues of men and of angels, if I liked, and call up old hours of delight with one evocative word. But I did like the look of his eyes, full in themselves, but socketed deeply, so that the eager sympathy of the man gleamed almost mysteriously in their depths, like water shining far down in a well. No doubt I only liked it then as a young egoist would, and took it as an extra glimmer of romantic luster added to the pleasing landscape of my personal beatitude. Certainly it was not till long after our parting, that night, that the old question rose in my mind. Had we spoken a word the whole time about any concern or interest of Jimmy's? Where would he spend his own holiday? Would he be going alone? Why, I had not even thought of inquiring. Pretty sort of beast I must have been. End of section 33. Section 34 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Didn't take care of himself. Part 4. My slight and passing compunction was revived the next winter by a letter from Miners of Durham, the third man with Jimmy and me, of an old-school triumvirate, somewhat the worse already for years and the cares of this world. Miners wrote, "Ever see Brinton? He's on my mind off and on. He's a dead-stick-it lawyer, it seems. Tout ce qu'il y a de manqué. Devil a chance of a brief. I imagine he always hated the very thought of the law. Longed to be an architect, I believe, but Pa Brinton was mad on the bar. It was all that damned gentleman instinct of Jimmy's that made him give in. His habit of throwing himself into everyone else's wishes and plans. Can't you see the whole thing? B. Père, crying out for the bar, and B. Fils, afraid that even to mention his dear architecture would be like cutting in rudely when somebody was speaking. I guess Jimmy has some regrets that are pretty good gnawers. The worst of it is, the father's finances are reported groggy. It seems he had some kind of encumbered estate. Ought to have sold long ago, but hung on. Pig-headed pride, I suppose. The usual thing. Anyhow, Jimmy's supplies are endangered. Of course, this is mere bizarre rumor. I have heard nothing from Jimmy himself. Nobody will. I see him the few times I'm in town, and I fish all I can to find out how it goes. But he never lets on. He doesn't turn crusty nor seem to allude. Only after I've gone, I find we've talked all the time about Durham Cathedral or my craze for skiing. My own experience. Not next time, though. I vowed I would take care of that. But there were no Alps for me the next year, nor even the next after that. Work kept me at home, with only short holidays at the lakes, where God has made rocks fit for any archangel to scramble on in his spare time. So I didn't go south, nor see Jimmy. A third year passed before the notorious Brinton bankruptcy came, and the learned judge laid the knout upon the back of Brinton père with the fine, free-swinging action that you may remember. Men like you, who feed their own personal vanity at the expense of society, that sort of beans was what Pa Brinton got. Part 5. You know how you feel at such times. To write or not to write to the friend whose father has just had a whipping at the cart's tail, to the public delight. That is the question. I didn't solve it. I only adjourned it from day to day. I let the thing slide. Perhaps the world was too much with me. I had just married and settled down on the best site, as it seemed at the time, in the whole Garden of Eden. Few sounds of distress could penetrate thither from the world of the unblessed outside. So 2 or 3 years slipped divinely away before time and place served, and to go and rout out Jimmy became the obvious next thing to do. He was in his old chambers, to my relief. I had feared lest that skinny warhorse, his income, might have been shot under him at the time of the paternal smash. But I only found one change in Jimmy, besides a sort of new rectangularity in his broad shoulders, and a gray hem fitted on to his very dark auburn hair. The strange thing was a touch of pride in his manner. It struck me like a sort of tiny notice board, with delicate but quite legible lettering on it to say that Jimmy, too, had his privacies, like another, and any dog found in the preserved area might get himself shot. If Jimmy had been any common and unclean person, you might have thought his father had been made a peer. Apart from that, he was eagerly friendly. He soon had me chattering. Where had my wife and I honeymooned? That was one of his questions. At Venice, I said. Venice, by Jove! He lit up at once, as if no other place had been in his thoughts since our last meeting. All the morning in that little low-roofed church? St. George, is it? On the Slavonic Quay, where the Carpaccios are? Sucking in that russet luster of theirs at your eyes till your souls were as brown as ripe corn? And then luncheon? And then a great swim at the Lido? And so back to Venice, across the lagoon, with the sun setting crimson behind the Euganean hills, and they like black pyramids standing against a dark flame, and dinner near a tall door-window opening on the Grand Canal, and ripples lapping and plopping outside in the warm dusk, and pretty little silly songs about funiculi, funicula, tinkling in from a gondola as it goes past, and both of you feeling, life, life, this is life, too wonderful ever to end. It wasn't just the words. Something else seemed to disengage itself from him, the breath of some passion that shed itself like a transfiguring atmosphere round those harvested pleasures of mine which he recalled. It made my own honeymoon more enchanting in recollection. The very queen of the Adriatic became twice herself as I looked back at her now through this entrancing and enriching haze. No wonder if it made me rather drunk. I suppose I rattled on about the joys of my commonplace travel, absurdly to my own contentment. Jimmy listened with positive genius. All he said was a stimulant word or two, now and again, to keep my tongue wagging happily, as a boy gives just a wee flick of his whip to keep his top going when once it spins well. Before I should have thought it possible, the flash sky signs over the Surreyside wharfs were winking at us across the black sheen of the Thames, though I had come before 3 o'clock on a fine day early in September. I looked at my watch. Already my train for the north called to me from St. Pancras. So now, it being too late, I remembered my vows to behave myself civilly. I was well ashamed of myself. I made some sort of stuttering show of asking how he had been all this time. Had he been away for his holiday yet? And so on. While I fumbled, I caught that look on him again, very quick, very slight, and yet definite. It was as if Jimmy's dignity stood to attention, on guard, and yet not aggressively. But he wore the openest air of consent to report on himself at some other time. "Lots of things to talk over," he said gaily, "when you come this way again. Goodbye to you." Yes, he was unmistakably changing. There was nobody now from whom the words goodbye could come at once so affectionately and so terminatively, so warm with goodwill, and yet so preventive of any answer except an instant farewell. Part 6. Possibly I was chilled a little, unwittingly, by that first touch of reticent frost in my friend. Or perhaps it was that for several years after that, time was flowing away for me, as it does during a play that is good. As long as the children of two persons happily married are young and have health, the years are like one unending instant of deep satisfaction. To friends you may seem to grow older, not to yourself. You are safely through youth and all its restless vapors, self-pity and plaguing desires, and no sign has come yet that the musty old phrases about man's invariably consignment to dust will ever seriously apply to your own fine, well-functioning person. 8 years must have passed like one good dream that fleeth before I next heard of Jimmy. It was again in a letter from Miners. "What news of old Brinton?" he wrote. "Mine is indirect only. You know that by trade I am what beautiful souls call, with proper disdain, a provincial attorney. So I have articled clerks, and articled clerks have exams to scrape through before our trade union will let them put up their brass plates. I share the joys and sorrows of my clerks, so far as they suffer me to, and lately I have made out that all articled clerkdom is ringing with praise of a London law tutor who coaches by letter, dirt cheap, and with a demonic power of getting inside these lads' minds, even by post, and feeling about for whatever it is that stumps 'em, and putting it right. Well, this wonder-worker is Brinton. I gather he took to the job when his father went broke, partly to keep himself going, but chiefly to pay off the old ass's debts. The restitution stunt, you know. The Walter Scott touch. Jimmy gets that sort of notion. But coaching in elementary law can't be quite the same fun as writing The Fair Maid of Perth. Appalling drudgery. A modicum of it would keep him. You know the austere way he lives, and he never cared a cuss about money. But now he's out to get thousands, just to pour into this damn private well of family honor. So he turns himself into a sort of sweating factory, run single-handed, 16 hours a day, so they say. While I read Miner's letter, I thought about dates. Yes, Jimmy's head must have been all abuzz with this scheme on the day when we had met last, and he had let the full jet of his imaginative sympathy play, hour after hour, on my holiday affairs, as if nothing else mattered to him in this world. He must have been in bewilderment, almost terror. Jimmy, the kind old conformer to everyone else's movements and wishes, invent a new calling. Jimmy, face advertising himself, some way or other. Jimmy, the dear helpless failure in life, put a price on a talent of his, untried and lodged in him useless till then, and go forth to market it. As well might a shy country boy start for London, to open a new stock exchange. Well, I must run up and see him at once. But you can't always get off at once. So I would go as soon as I could. And then the war came, and all our little arrangements were knocked on the head, more or less. Soon it was not of one friend of your youth, but of most of them, that you might have ugly news any time. I suppose it hardened us all, in a way. Part 7. Halfway through the war, I came home for a while with a wound. Before going back to the low-country mud, I ran across Miners, now short of a leg, and chucked out of the army and back at his trade. Mainly, he told me, making out wills for second lieutenants. He had seen Jimmy. Jimmy, he said, had tried to enlist every few months, but had always been barred by the doctors. Heart weak, they said. All Jimmy's pupils had gone to the wars, so his income was off. But he had got a laborer's job in some shell-making place. I think it was lifting great chunks of pig iron all day. Each time he tried to enlist, after this, the faculty told him his heart was much worse. He still slept at Vane Court, Miners said. As hardly anyone slept in the temple, it looked specially lightless at night, as if it were darkened purposely. So enemy airmen thought it must be the War Office, or Ministry of Munitions, or some such choice mark, and Jimmy had had German bombs dropping all round his attic while he reposed after the toils of the day. But Miners had found him convinced that many more bombs must surely be falling everywhere else. Only one letter did I have from Jimmy during the whole of the war. It was early in April 1918, just after we got the big knock from the Germans. I found Jimmy's letter waiting, along with another, the day the remaining 3/10 of my battalion were told that now they might lie down and sleep at some ruined place near Amiens. For 7 days and nights we had been hustled back, kicking the best we could, though poor was the best, and not resting at all the way from St. Quentin. Our division had lost all its guns, and none of us had so much as a rag of warm vanity left to wrap himself up in. I believe every jack man, as he hobbled away in the dark to his billet, was pretty well sick with the childish desire for a kind word from someone before he stretched down to sleep and got a night off from his misery. My other letter was from a publicist of repute, a man noted for giving a backbone of vigorous and virile thought, as his admirers would say, to the dull, puny, hand-to-mouth lives of average men. This sage was virtuous. He wrote, "What we have to do now, I suppose, is to achieve the right temper in presence of the accomplished fact of defeat. After all, it can be done. It has often been done. France had to do it in 1870. That was the line of this wise friend of Job's. All was over, so we must make the right faces while Germany went on to give us a good running kick in the stomach." Jimmy wrote, "Oh, well done, you Fifth Army people. I swear you have Fritz tired. He's done. It's just the first battle of Ypres all over again. England within half an inch of her life, and the cord frayed most devilish thin, and nothing left but the sort of pluck that will fight on without a blink of a hope to be seen. But I believe with all my soul you've done the miracle. You've worn 'em down, for all their strength. You know how the turn often comes, quite unbelievably, just when you're feeling dead beat past caring what happens, how the storm unaccountably blows itself out, and all the strain's suddenly gone and victory come. You're like that. Somehow I know it. If you were ever a soldier, you know how it makes your face sting with discomfort to hear the formal gush of civilians about your supposed martial virtues. They mean so well. They know so little. They miss the point by so much, and Jimmy hadn't spared the butter. Coming from anyone else, it would have arrived in France rancid. And yet somehow to me his letter, coming just when it did, was indescribably moving and heartening. One felt that somebody at least had understood. Someone's heart and mind had been with us all that hellish week. Squabbling politicians and commanders had somehow, between them, sent us to sea in a coffin ship, undermanned, overloaded, unhelped. All our agony and bloody sweat had only just kept the rotten craft from foundering right out. None of us doubted that blame and shame would be heaped on us eagerly by the great and the wise whose muddles and jars we had just been expiating. More than half of us with our lives. But someone, at least, understood. Like whatever it is that takes wing from the wireless mast of a sinking ship and thrills out into letters and words that set men's hearts aflame half an ocean away. So the bitterness of our deserted state and our long losing fight and the numbing and quelling brutality of our weariness had transmitted themselves to the distant mind of a friend and fired it with a pity as passionate as Christ's. The help I got from that letter was positively physical. Everything hurt less at once. Legs that had ached like bad teeth just with fatigue now lay quite easy on the stone floor of my billet. Soldiers, you know, do become like small children. They get back to very simple emotional states. When I had read Jimmy's letter 2 or 3 times, I found myself giving a big sigh of contentment. I went straight off to sleep, like a child who has had a bad day at odds with its whole nursery world, but comes round at last, under a benedictive kiss, the last thing at night from its mother. Its universe has suddenly been reconstructed. End of section 34. Section 35 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Didn't take care of himself. Part 8. It was not merely Europe that had to be put together again in the first years of peace. Many minor Humpty Dumptys had fallen off walls of their own. All sorts of solitary and insignificant men and women, the odds and ends of a complicated civilization, had lost or broken their curious little appliances for hooking victuals into their reach, and keeping up private beds of their own. I gathered, indirectly, that Jimmy, for one, had the deuce of a fight to keep himself going, till he could rally round him the unslaughtered remnant of his old clientele of thick-headed articled clerks. As a lone wolf, he had no trade union to see to him, and he had no fat to live on till business revived. His father's famished creditors had had the lot as it grew. I wrote, a year after the peace, to press him to stay for a while at our grey moorland cottage in the wind and heather of the West Riding. No good. Work that couldn't be left, was the reason he gave for his refusal. From some turn of a phrase, I took it that this reason would last, though he didn't quite say he would never come to us. Somehow I felt sure, perhaps because he was so immeasurably far from hinting anything of the kind, that Jimmy was pretty well in the throes. I heard from miners the year after that the old boy had scraped through, at a price. He had kept his fees down to the pre-war tariff, though living cost twice as much now. I think he must have had the born teacher's knack of laying his mind close alongside the weak, muddled mind of dull youth. Anyhow, custom returned in the end, as flies do, to first-rate sugar lavishly spilled. No doubt some of his pupils sneered at him for letting good stuff go so cheap. Perhaps wondered what the catch was. Had he been lagged for something, or was he just a fool, though a genius at coaching? Still, they grabbed at the good bargain. His fame in the underworld of the law was becoming greater than ever. He was a beneficent Peter, holding the keys of a profession and not charging much at the gate. If Jimmy, miners wrote, had a grain of the businessman in him, he would have turned the thing into a huge cramming shop before now. Big house in Kensington, lots of advertisement, thumping high fees, whole staff of the briefless to do all the coolie work, Jimmy to count up the money. Not he, though. He's primitive, gives nothing less at a time than the whole of himself. It's that damned over-sympathy touch. He'll be used up in 5 years. The letter alarmed me, but my alarm was allayed by a rare windfall, a letter from Jimmy himself. It was cheerful, amusing, very friendly. He had never, he said at the end, paid his respects to my wife. "You must make a break," Jimmy wrote. "In your very next trajet of this wicked city, from Euston to Victoria, and both of you dine with me at the Meurice, 7:30, whatever the month and the day. I rely on your honor." I left it at that. The next year, in early July, my wife and I were at the rendezvous. Part 9. Jimmy did us right well. The Meurice restaurant is one of the places where many consciously rich people eat, lest they fail to shed enough money per meal. A little too Persian for me, but Jimmy, I fancy, had some simple notion about doing due honor to brides the first time they dine with you, and my wife and I had only been married for 17 years. It had been one of the hottest of midsummer days, and we dined at a great open window that looked down on a strip of public garden peopled with statues of successful men, and out across the river to its frayed southern fringe of old barges and mud and squat wharfs, changeless in a changing London, still as picturesquely tattered and torn as it had been in our lost youth, for Jimmy and I were now old fellows of 50. It was midsummer London's best hour, the one when she softens her long, hot afternoon bawl into an animated murmur. The dim drone of the Strand had sunk lower since 7. Big Ben called 8 o'clock in a voice that had grown strangely fresh and distinct. It was broad daylight still, and the lamps coming out along the embankment were no mere affairs of utility yet, only a string of gay decorations to lighten your heart, like the one star that blinked amidst the soft glow of the late sunset over Charing Cross Station. Jocund little noises came up to our ears from loiterers in the garden. Perhaps you must be a provincial, like me, to know how happily London can stir you at times. London, London, our delight, the city that awakes by night. My wife breathed the good lover-like lines of M. Le Gallienne with the fresh relish of one not surfeited with overmuch of London or of poetry. "Yes, yes," Jimmy said, listening eagerly. His eyes shone. He seemed to take light at my wife's little spark of frank enjoyment. And then he slipped into a kind of quaint descant on the good old city's gift of rising to our occasions. of being all things to all men, and helping them to feel their feelings right out, and to push their thoughts through to the end, whatever they may be. I wish I remembered his words, but perhaps it's better I shouldn't. Merely written, without the warm urgency of the voice and the look, they might give you none of the passionate sympathy that seemed to us both to burn in them then. I can only recall a few scraps, visions or mere glimpses of London in this or that humor or mood that is not hers at all, but merely her mirroring power of giving us back our own state of sadness or jollity, made twice itself. London deepening the sunny melancholy of the mind, when an aureate autumn afternoon broods over the Strand. The motes of gold dust afloat in the air, the tips of the 2 spires dreaming in haze, the hum of the traffic itself growing pensive, all the visible scene seeming to sink into reverie, and London at dusk, on some winter Sunday, playing up to someone's mood of fine desolation. When snow has been falling all day, and the buses have given it up and gone home, and the muted streets begin looking queer, twice their usual width, with the snow stretching level and same from facade to facade, and strange roofs that you hadn't noticed before, giving a kind of white cry to your eyes to look up. And anyone else that's left in the streets is a kind of brother castaway, and says good night, and so on. Heavenly and other visions tumbled out pell-mell, gift illustrations thrown off in a generous heat of invention, to add weight and charm to the light words of a friend. We sat a long time at our coffee and smoked. The lamps twinkled brighter and brighter among the still leaves of the planes on the embankment. Whispers and laughter, emboldened by the warm darkness, rose from the garden walks like a gay fume. The whole air was vivacious, rich with the immemorial odor of life, and murmurous with its intimate promptings to dream and desire. And life seemed simple, too. You know how it can fluster you sometimes, like several people shouting at you, at once, all sorts of different things. There was no clamor now. You might fancy the whole world had said, "Hush," and taken a deep breath, and that now whatever it wanted to say was coming out of its lips, all clear and liquid and pearly. Love everything, take everything on trust, write nothing off as hopelessly bad. That was the gist of it. Whatever might have seemed to me ugly or vile was transmuting itself for the hour into the touching littleness of the offenses of children, their little grabbings and rows, and the grand mess they make of the lawn and the beds in trying to work out their vast thoughts and prescient plans. Good moments. We live for them in a way, the strange fire lit in the blood, and the release from our own everyday dullness. Up and up shoots the tremulous flame of our new insight, till there appears to be no pitch of ecstatic lucidity that we may not ascend to. And then, of course, vision fails. The flame burns itself out. The flush vanishes from the high snows. We are shut in again, and blear-eyed. But we know every time that we have not been deceived. We were nearer to life's glowing heart. Doors were opening. I fancy some people, poets, painters, all sorts of artists, must know how to bring on this state of the mind or the soul, or whatever it is, in themselves when they choose, anyhow, pretty often. Jimmy wasn't an artist. His father had smothered all that. But it was always in talk with Jimmy that those divine moments came to me best, brought the most piercing light and stayed longest. To be with a friend seemed to awaken him some dormant power of seeing to perfection whatever his friend might try or desire to see, of seeing it dressed in all its possible interest and beauty and wonder, merely for him to place at this friend's disposal. when he was moved in that way, a virtue of some sort went out of him into your mind. You were inspired and empowered. You had a devil of a magnificent and transfiguring kind. However much Jimmy had failed for himself, in the ways of the world he carried about him this magical lamp for the use of his friends. He had the key, for them, to the only genuine garden of enchantment. Part 10. Not that I saw it all then, but my wife did. My wife has twice my perception. "You never told me," she said in the taxi on the way back to our hotel, "how uncommon your friend is. Why, his kind are the pick of the earth, the only true salt, the ones who can only be all that's in them to be by putting themselves in the place of somebody else. Then they're all air and fire and force till they have to sink back again into themselves. Oh, why didn't somebody marry him?" She lapsed into thought, and I knew she was mentally reviewing the ranks of possible mates and protectresses for a defenseless specimen of selflessness. Then she pressed my arm suddenly, just as if she had espied something disquieting. "What," she said quickly, "is he doing now? They're not safe, those dear things. The light goes out, and they're all alone in the dark. It's not safe." When she said it, I saw all at once what Jimmy's nocturnal return to the echoing emptiness of the temple must be after one of these great outflows of his genius for good comradeship. I could hear now his solitary footsteps ringing loud along the flags of Middle Temple Lane, and up the creaking stairs, back to the room where he had sat out in failure and drudgery all the prime of his life. "Oh, I have ta'en too little thought of this." I felt like old Lear when he suddenly and belatedly saw how much more is suffered by other people than he had ever known. I saw it now with a poignant clearness, almost heard it, like the voice of a creature crying out to be helped. It was as if I felt sure, though I couldn't tell why, that someone was bleeding to death alone and stoically on the other side of a wall. At the hotel door, when we stood in the light, I looked at my wife without speaking. Her thoughts must have been going along the same road as mine, for she said at once, "Yes, dear, go quickly. It might be too late." I re-entered the taxi and drove to the temple. End of section 35. Section 36 of Action by Charles Edward Montague. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Didn't take care of himself. Part 11. The cloistral place had barred in by that time its night population of ghosts of old lawyers and lean mice and a few living hermits. But I prevailed with the porter at the great gate. Inside, as the gate clanged behind me, the hollow resonance of my feet on the stones made me nervous. I tried to walk more softly, as if the resident apparitions might be disturbed if I didn't. I almost slunk down the lane to Vane Court, and got more and more on my toes as I ran up the worn wooden stairs, shamed all the time by some unaccountable consciousness of prying. I found I was dodging from shadow to shadow at the landings, where the tall windows were. Good. Jimmy's oak or outer door stood half open. A dim shaft of light shone through it aslant. For an inner door, the sitting-room one, was half open too. Both looked as if someone had rushed through them regardless, bent wholly on something within. I rapped the great oak, got no answer, and went on, a couple of steps, to knock on the light door beyond. A voice strangely remote, reckless and casual, not Jimmy's voice, and yet oddly related to Jimmy's, came from within. "Knock, knock, knock! Oh, come along in, a God's name!" I obeyed. Jimmy still had his hat and his overcoat on, for all the night's heat. He was sitting, his back to me and his face to the fireless grate at the room's further end. He was leaning well back, with his right arm out at full stretch across the arm of the chair, holding a square whiskey bottle by its short neck. On the table there lay a wet cork, still impaled on a corkscrew, also a white cap of tinfoil, the maiden snood of such bottles. No glass was in sight, and no water. About a third of the whiskey was gone, though only a bare 20 minutes had passed since we had bidden Jimmy good night. He had wasted no time. I couldn't tell whether he knew I was there. I thought not. He didn't turn or speak. He was shut up, I fancied, in some intense state of himself, some passionate absorption, perhaps a heavenly sense of rest in a refuge from unendurable thoughts. For a minute, perhaps, I stood gazing. From second to second, I clung on to the safety, the relative safety, that there is in not having yet made an unescapable choice between two irreparable lines of action. While I stared and hung back, Jimmy gave a great start and said to himself, "My God, no!" as sleepers cry out at some turn in a dream, and then the stuff went up to his mouth. I could hear the glass knock on his teeth, and he took a great pull, only checking a second or so at a time to let the air jostle and gurgle its way past his lips into the emptying bottle. I am a well enough seasoned vessel, but such a drink would have choked me with coughing. Jimmy only gave such a sigh of relief as I have heard a half-flayed soldier breathe when the surgeon's emollient picric acid flowed over the burns. He let his head go further back and gazed up at the shabby rows of worn textbooks of law and the old-school rowing prizes shelved above them, lidded flagons of mist-colored pewter, lettered with the names of many companions in the untainted victories of youth. Heaven knows what his look was like. Dreamy, I hoped. His mind might be back now in those unreconstructible days. Was I right to do what I did? At the moment it felt like the one decent course, to steal out of the room on my toes, and right out of the temple, and leave him all that I could of his privacy and his pride. He might be in paradise now, for an hour or two, whatever the terms of his admission to that brief felicity. And if he should see me, who knows? He might never have spoken to me again. Yet I knew that a chance had been missed. I had tripped over a secret that he would never tell me now. As soon would he have spat on my wife's drawing-room carpet as bore a friend. So he would regard it, with any trouble or peril of his. And I had sown seeds of possible estrangement between us. I knew the cold mists that can rise from things known, but never to be mentioned, between friend and friend. But the choice had to be made. Who can be wise and humane, resolute and prudent, all in a moment? Part 12. Early in the winter that followed, I heard from miners what I expected. "I am afraid," miners wrote, "our old Jimmy is beaten. His laundress asked me to come, said he could hardly stand up, but was trying to work all the time. When I got there, his face had the look, you know, that makes you feel little for death to change here. He's unbelievably wasted. I phoned and a doctor came in 10 minutes. You could see him put on the black cap at the door, though he spoke as they do, with good air and good nursing, etc. We've got him into an airy hospital on the Heights, north of London. If you want to see him, come soon." I reached the place next morning. They call it the Hospital of St. Catherine of Siena, the saint that had beautiful manners. It wasn't visiting time, but they let me in at once when they heard which patient I wanted. I knew what that meant, and also why I was warned by the sister in charge. "I'm afraid you'll find him very ill," she said, with an unjaded kindness worthy of her saint, as if she had never before had a man come to see a friend die. From the door of the ward I could see directly which was his bed. It had round it the screens they put up, lest the rest of a ward see the ultimate pangs. I once thought I had seen in war all the worst shows of death. Every shadow, cruelly grotesque or starkly horrible, that the one angel whom all of us are sure to entertain can throw down upon a face before actually alighting upon it. But I had been mistaken. I had not known how gaunt and waxen a corpse, with the skin strained incredibly tight over cheekbone and jaw, could still have an audible voice, and eyes able to grow heart-rendingly bright at the sight of a friend. In greeting people whom he liked, Jimmy had always had a characteristic gesture, a forward-reaching impulse of the shoulders, quite different from a bow. You know how a warm-hearted dog will wag its whole self, and not its tail only, at sight of an ally. The thing had been akin to that. Mantling with pleasure, the goodwill in Jimmy's friendly interior had animated some corresponding movement of the body, as if trying to project itself towards the person he was glad to see. Over his emaciated shoulders there passed now a shadowy semblance to that friendward craning of the heart. I drew nearer to him in some unmeditated movement of response, but the faintly raised skeleton of a hand warned me away. "Tuberculosis," he said. "Mustn't come within range." He smiled. "Senile tuberculosis. At 50. Do you think it too punishing?" He knew how it stood. He spoke like a man with affairs to wind up and debts to discharge. The earnest way he thanked me first for having come to see him so often almost bowled me over to start with. Me, the lifelong deserter of this fond thanksgiver, for years at a time. And then I could see he collected himself for an effort. He laid on my coat sleeve a hand that seemed as light as a singing bird's claw. "I was afraid," he said. "I had used up your patience. That night at my chambers. The time I didn't turn round. You remember?" I suppose I assented somehow. "I cut you," he said. "Unthinkable action. I saw you in my little shaving glass that I'd hung on the wall, and I didn't turn round. And no excuse either, except just that I wasn't there. See? I've had 2 worlds to live in for, I can't remember how long, and I'd just gone away to the other. Can you imagine?" Yes, I said eagerly. "Oh, good," he said in a deep sigh of relief, as if that moment of direct self-explanation had taxed his endurance. He spoke lightly now, like a man gladly passing to some impersonal topic. "The temple's a great place at night. It's not simply empty. A brand-new house could be empty. The temple's super-empty with 500 years of having been emptied, and emptied of youth and then emptied of it again. A place can't remain just the same after so many warm-blooded creatures have got themselves caught in it young and have lost heart and dried up, by degrees, each of 'em in his own cell, very private and decent, and then they're dusted away like dead flies, for all the passionate hearts they had once. Such a place has to become like an old fiddle that's saturated with all the old music that ever was made on it, reeking with beauty and pain, love and loneliness and regret, the lacrimae rerum. You know the old tag. I knew, just by sight, a poor devil or 2 that lived there alone. Cranks, I suppose, or rejects. Fellows who had the game lost from the very first ball. I used to see 'em crawling in and out in the daytime. I suppose they were trying to look like anyone else. But nobody saw them at night. They must have just shut the door and sat quiet and heard the trees rustle. You know how those trees stand about in the temple. You'd think they'd get nervous at night. The boughs huddle together and shudder although there isn't a wind, and then the men that have failed sit and shiver and know that they're done for. I guess they lose hold now and then, the way the beasts do in the zoo, give way and blubber to themselves like children. Why? Mayn't I start all over again? Why should it be only one try, and then everything over? His voice was weakening, but a spark had flickered up into flame in his eye, and his waxen face was flushed with compassion, as I knew that it could not have been if he had known he was pleading his own pitiful case, as well as that of those brother unfortunates. I believe he had clean forgotten himself. He was using up his remnant of life in the last of his many efforts of passionate sympathy. "That's why they drink," he said simply. "You see, it's the nearest they'll ever get now to any of the things that they've missed. Distinction, adventure, discovery, conquest, fatherhood, all the big things. Cup us till the world go round, you know, till everything runs clear, and everyone you could dislike is unmasked and turns out a good fellow, the way people do when they're dead, and depth after depth of truth opening out, and everything slipping into its own perfect place, and the whole world astir with a sort of vast, mystical rightness that knows how to use everything good and everything bad just the same, to push on with some one magnificent purpose. The trees themselves come all right then. They stop peering and nudging each other. All rubbish, you think?" He spoke almost entreatingly. He was terribly tired. "No, no," I warmly assured him. Just didn't I know how delusion and vision are tangled together in that half-understood commotion of mind and heart, so that a Burns or a Mangan may just catch a glimpse, as he sinks through the pit infernal, of unities, coherences, and charities that are hidden from my sober sight. The sister moved a screen a little and looked in on us. "I'm afraid," she said to me, with a courtesy almost tender, "you ought." I nodded, and then she left us alone for our last minutes. "I'm forgiven, then?" Jimmy said, looking up eagerly. I stooped to embrace him, but his care for me was quicker than my grief and affection. He put his hand over his mouth. "Not for want of love," he murmured. His voice was worn almost to nothing. I kissed the hand and went out, unable to answer. Part 13. Miners and I found a little to do as Jimmy's executors. He came almost as near as man can in these days to fulfilling the old saying, "Naked came I into the world, and naked go I out of it." His ant-like labors had just paid off the last of his patrimony of debts before the war came to upset his finances and Europe's. He left us his few books, mainly the bigger Latins and Greek, and Montaigne and Molière, and Cervantes, and 3 or 4 English poets. He hadn't read widely, but did read some lovable writers a great many times, so that they got built into his mind and shone out now and then through his talk, as you may have noticed. On one shelf, however, I found what might well be the darling of a collector. It was a scarce, rather exquisite anthology of Greek love lyrics, delicately bound. My name and the date of my marriage were on the title page, in Jimmy's hand, and also a couplet of Greek elegiacs conveying Jimmy's old liking for me and his hope that this small sheaf of songs about love and delight might not come amiss in the honey-sweet month, all wittily worked into 12 burnished words of the old gem-cutting scholarship, now so much out of fashion. I easily saw why that wedding present had never been given. Misgiving would have been certain to seize on Jimmy when he had fashioned that graceful jet of affection, lest he should be showing off if he sent it. For he had always been almost fantastically far away from the happy state of those who feel that the world can never be offered enough of their own fine personalities. Jimmy's impulse was rather to be to a friend what a bright fire is, or a very good chair, something which puts you at ease and may help you to be at your best and to shine, but vaunteth not itself, and seeketh not its own. End of section 36. End of He Didn't Take Care of Himself. End of Action and Other Short Stories by Charles Edward Montague.